The January cold in Calgary had a way of getting into everything, into the walls of the house, into the silence at the dinner table, into the spaces my husband left behind when he said he was working late. I was 31. I had built something real. Not inherited, not handed down, but built from nothing. My catering company had grown from a borrowed commercial kitchen and 3 staff members to a full-service operation running corporate events across the city. I had contracts with 2 downtown law firms and a standing deal with a hotel on Ninth Avenue that kept us booked most of the year. My husband had come along 6 years into that, charming and capable, and when I offered him a role managing our accounts and supplier relationships, it felt natural. He was good with numbers, he was good with people. I thought I knew him. The December morning, everything changed, started like every other December morning. Snow against the windows, coffee going cold on the counter, the dog pacing by the door. I was reviewing next week's event schedule when the doorbell rang. The woman standing on my porch didn't look like she should be standing anywhere. She was maybe 65, hunched under a thin wool coat that was no match for the temperature. Her face was the color of old paper. She had one hand braced against the doorframe and the other clutching a cloth shopping bag to her chest, and when she exhaled, I could hear the work her lungs were doing. "Are you Joanna?" she asked. "I am," I said. I stepped back. "Please come in. You look frozen." She shook her head at first. Then some other decision seemed to win out, and she stepped inside. I led her to the living room, and she lowered herself into the armchair by the window, the way people do when sitting has become its own kind of effort. I offered tea. She waved it away. "My name is Frances," she said. "I don't have a lot of time, and I mean that in more than one way." She paused. Her hands, still wrapped around the bag, were trembling. "I have lung cancer. Stage 4. The palliative team says weeks, not months." I didn't say anything. There was nothing to say to that. "I have a daughter," she continued. "Her name is Blythe. She's 34, and for the past 7 years she has been seeing your husband." The room didn't shift. It just went quiet. The kind of quiet where you realize the furnace has been running this whole time and you never noticed until it stopped. "That's not possible," I said. My voice sounded like it was coming from somewhere across the room. Frances didn't flinch. She had clearly prepared for this. "I know you don't want it to be possible. I didn't want it to be true either. But I'm dying and she has a little boy. He's 4 years old. His name is Owen. He calls your husband Dad." I stood up. I sat down. I don't remember which came first. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because when I'm gone," Frances said, "there will be no one left who knows the truth except people who benefit from keeping it from you. Blythe she's not a bad person, but she loves him. She believes he's leaving you. He's been telling her that for 4 years." She looked at her hands. "And I have a grandson. I need someone who knows he exists." She reached into the cloth bag and placed a photograph on my coffee table. I didn't want to look. I made myself look. It was my husband at what I recognized as Edworthy Park. I knew it from the suspension bridge in the background. He had a small boy on his shoulders, a laughing, dark-haired little boy with his arms stretched out like wings. My husband was laughing too. I had seen him laugh like that maybe a handful of times in 6 years. He looked like a different man. Lighter. Like a version of himself he had never shown me. Frances left shortly after. She said she had a cab waiting. She said she was sorry. At the door she paused and said, "He's a good father to Owen. I don't say that to hurt you. I say it because Owen didn't choose any of this." Then she was gone. I sat on the living room floor for a long time, not crying, just sitting. The photograph was on the coffee table and I couldn't look at it directly, the way you can't look directly at a solar eclipse. My husband, I'll call him by what he was in our life together, my business partner as much as anything else, was due home at 7. He'd been managing supplier contracts for 2 years by then. He knew every invoice, every vendor relationship, every line of our financial structure. I had given him full signing authority on the business account 18 months earlier because I was running 2 events simultaneously and didn't have time for the administrative load. I had trusted him with the engine of everything I had built. I picked up the photograph. I put it in the kitchen drawer under the takeout menus. And then, I did what I always do when something threatens to collapse me. I went to work. Not in the kitchen. At my laptop. I pulled up our accounting software. I had the administrator credentials. I had always kept those, even when I handed over the day-to-day. I don't know what made me log in. Maybe it was the way Francis had said 7 years, and I'd been running the numbers in my head since she left. 7 years. He and I had only been together for 5, which meant there was overlap from the very beginning. I typed his name into the search field. Then I typed the word personal and let the filters run. What came back stopped my breathing. There were expenses I didn't recognize, supplier payments to a company I'd never heard of, Hartwell provisions that went back almost 2 years, small at first, 300 here, 500 there, then larger, then regular. I clicked into the invoices. They were for food service supplies, which made surface-level sense for a catering company, but I knew our actual suppliers. I had built those relationships myself. Hartwell Provisions wasn't one of them. I called our accountant the next morning. Her name is Sylvie. She had done our books since year 1, and she was at our office within the hour. I watched her face as she went through what I had found the night before. Sylvie has the kind of face that gives nothing away in client meetings. That morning, it gave something away. "Joe," she said finally, "how long has he had access to the business account?" 18 months. She turned the laptop toward me and pointed to a column of transactions. "These transfers to Hartwell Provisions. There's no corresponding inventory, no delivery records, no tax receipts that match. These are payments going somewhere, but they're not coming back as product." "How much?" She ran the numbers quietly. "Across the 18 months, if we include the vendor credits he redirected, somewhere between $40,000 and $50,000. The number sat between us like something physical. And there's something else. Sylvie pulled up a different screen. 2 of these supplier contracts were renegotiated in September. New payment terms, new account routing. He would have needed your signature on the amendments. I didn't sign those. "I know," she said. "I've seen your signature for 6 years." I drove home that afternoon in the kind of calm that isn't really calm. It's just what happens when you're so far past shock that your body stops performing emotion and starts performing function. I went through our shared filing cabinet. I found his personal bank statements, the ones I'd never had reason to look at. There was an account I didn't know about. The deposits matched the Hartwell outflows almost exactly. I fed our dog. I made dinner. I texted him that I was making pasta if he wanted to be home by 7. He came home at 7:15. He kissed my cheek. He said the roads were bad. I said, "How was your day?" He said, "Long, you know how it is." I said, "I do." I watched him eat dinner and I thought about the little boy in the park with his arms out like wings. I called our business lawyer the following morning. Her name is Priya, and she had been advising me since I incorporated. I told her what Sylvie had found. I told her about the forged signatures. I did not tell her about Francis or Blythe or Owen because that part was in her file. That part was mine. Priya was quiet for a moment. Then, "Don't say anything to him yet. Don't change anything. Give me a week to document this properly." What happens after a week? We remove his signing authority, freeze the business accounts pending a forensic review, and we file with the RCMP fraud unit. The forged signatures alone are criminal. The misappropriation compounds it significantly. And the money? We'll pursue civil recovery. Whether we get it back depends on where it went and whether it's been spent. She paused. "Joe, is there anything else I should know?" "Yes," I said. "But it doesn't change the legal picture, it just explains the why." I spent that week learning to perform ordinary life. I booked an event venue. I approved a menu. I attended a supplier meeting and shook hands with people I'd known for years, and felt the entire time like I was watching myself through a window. At home, I cooked dinner and asked about his day, and listened to him lie with such ease that I started to wonder if the ease was the point. If he had done this for so long, it had simply become his natural register. On the Thursday, he came home from what he said was a meeting with a new potential client. His collar was different when he left than when he arrived. I noticed and said nothing. The following Monday, I told him I had landed a major contract, a national food brand looking to partner with a local caterer for a product launch event. I said the brand's regional director wanted to meet us both, that they were old school. They wanted to see a team. I told him the meeting was Wednesday at our office boardroom and asked him to clear his afternoon. He lit up. He asked which brand. I named a real one and watched him run the math in his head. The size of it, what it could mean, what it might position him for. He said he'd be there. Wednesday came. I arrived at the office early. Priya was there. Sylvie was there. Our office manager, who had worked for me for 4 years and to whom I owed a great deal, sat quietly in the corner. There was no brand representative. There was no new contract. There was a printed binder on the boardroom table, an RCMP financial crimes officer waiting in the hallway. He walked in at 2 o'clock, looking like a man who expected to be celebrated. He registered the room before he registered me. Priya first, then Sylvie, then the absence of anyone who looked like a corporate client. His step slowed. His expression didn't collapse so much as recalibrate. "Joanna," he said, "what is this?" "Sit down," I said. He didn't sit. "Where's the brand rep?" "There isn't one. Sit down." He sat. I pushed the binder across the table. "That's 18 months of transactions. Hartwell provisions, the redirected vendor credits, the account in your name that received the funds." I let him open it. I watched the color leave his face the way water leaves a glass. Fast, then, all at once. And on page 14, the 2 supplier amendments with your version of my signature. He closed the binder. He opened his mouth. "Don't," I said. "Don't tell me it's a misunderstanding. Don't tell me you are going to put it back. I've been doing this long enough to know what the books are supposed to look like." "Joanna?" "Was it for her?" I asked. "For Blythe?" The silence that followed told me everything Frances had already told me and more. "Her mother came to see me," I said. 6 weeks ago. She was dying and she came to my door in January because she needed someone to know that her grandson existed. That's how I found out. From a woman with stage 4 cancer who had more integrity in her last weeks than you've had in the 6 years I've known you. He tried 3 or 4 things after that. He tried sorry. He tried, "I love you. It was a mistake. I didn't mean for it to get this far." He tried, "You don't understand what it was like." He looked at the table when he said most of it, which I think was the truest thing about the whole conversation, that even in the moment of being caught, he couldn't quite meet my eyes. Priya handed him the notice of termination of his role in the company. The RCMP officer came in from the hallway. I watched him stand up and realized there was nothing left for him to do but leave. He looked back at me from the doorway. I don't know what he was looking for. I didn't give it to him. The weeks that followed were the hardest work I've ever done, and I started a business from a borrowed kitchen, so that's saying something. The forensic accountant Priya brought in traced the Hartwell funds through to a personal account and then to a condo purchased in Inglewood, registered in Blythe's name. The money was gone in the practical sense. The civil claim was filed. The criminal charges proceeded. I told my staff in a meeting the week after. I stood at the front of our kitchen, people I'd worked alongside for years, and I told them the truth. There had been financial fraud. The person responsible was gone. The business was intact. Their jobs were safe. I showed them the bookings for the next quarter, which were full because I had spent 5 years making them full, and his theft, while significant, had not hollowed us out entirely. One of our event coordinators started clapping from the back of the room. Others followed. It was quiet and a little awkward, and it meant everything. Priya was extraordinary through all of it. So was Sylvie. So was my sister, who drove up from Lethbridge when I finally called her and stayed for 10 days and never once said "I told you so," which is the most generous thing a person can do. The hardest night was the night I found out Frances had died. I got a call from a number I didn't recognize, and when I answered, it was a woman from the palliative care unit at Foothills Hospital. Frances had listed my name and her personal effects, just my name and number, on a folded piece of paper in her coat pocket. The woman said she had passed that morning, peacefully, which felt like the one mercy available. I sat in my car in the parking lot of the grocery store and I cried in a way I hadn't cried once through the whole preceding month. Not for my marriage, not for the money, for Frances, who had put on that thin coat in January and stood on my porch and told me the truth because she loved her grandson and because she could not die holding a lie that wasn't hers to hold. Her daughter had found out she'd come to me. I learned this later through a mutual contact. Blythe had been furious, had said things to Frances in those last weeks that I don't have words for, things that should not be said to a dying mother. Frances had died without her daughter at her bedside. I thought about Owen for a long time after that. 4 years old. His father was facing criminal charges. His mother was a woman in crisis. His grandmother had just died, having been turned away by her own child. What was his fault in any of this? I have an accountant I trust completely and a lawyer who can be discreet. What I set up was small, routed through a community foundation I'd supported for years, designated as an anonymous family support grant, structured to cover childcare costs and eventually, when he was old enough, educational support. Sylvie handles the disbursements. Blythe receives a quarterly letter from the foundation on plain letterhead. She has never questioned it. People rarely question help when they need it. I don't know if it's the right thing. I've asked myself that question more times than I can count. I know it's not nothing. I know it's not revenge. It is, I think, the only response to innocence that felt honest. Frances asked me, in the last thing she said on my porch, to know that Owen existed. I am doing more than knowing. I'm making sure that when he understands the shape of what happened, he will have had a foundation that wasn't built on his father's lies or his mother's grief. He will have had something clean. The trial wrapped up in the fall. I didn't attend every day, I had a business to run, but I was there for the verdict. He was found guilty on 2 counts of fraud over $5,000 under the criminal code and 1 count of forgery. He was sentenced to 22 months in a federal facility and ordered to make restitution, though the forensic accountant had been clear that recovering the full amount would take years. He looked older at sentencing. The good suits were gone. He looked like someone who had made a very long calculation and gotten the math catastrophically wrong. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel much of anything except tired, and underneath the tired, a quiet that hadn't been there before. The quiet of a problem correctly solved. The quiet of a house where the thing making you uneasy has finally been named. My company is stronger now than it was 2 years ago. We brought in a professional operations manager, a man named Hugh who came from a restaurant group and who treats a spreadsheet with something approaching reverence. Our contracts are up. We added a corporate breakfast service that I'd been wanting to try for 3 years but hadn't had the bandwidth to launch. Last spring, we were shortlisted for a City Business Award. We didn't win, but being on the list felt like something. My daughter. I have a daughter now, which still surprises me when I think about it. 18 months old and completely uninterested in sleeping past 5:30, will grow up knowing that her mother built something and protected it and did not let it be taken from her. She will also grow up knowing, when she's old enough, that the right response to being wronged is not always the loudest one. Sometimes it is the quietest. I think about Frances often. I think about the courage it takes to put on a coat that's too thin for the weather and go tell a stranger the truth, because the alternative is dying without having done the right thing. I think about how she spent her last weeks. I think about what she lost in order to give her grandson a future she would never see. I have a photograph of Owen, one I found in the document package during the civil proceedings, submitted as evidence of the relationship. He's in a yard somewhere, maybe 3 years old in the photo, holding a stick like it's a sword. He looks like a child who has not yet learned to be anything other than exactly himself. I keep the photograph in the back of my desk drawer, not to remind myself of what was done to me, to remind myself of what I chose to do about it. There are things that come to your door uninvited: grief, betrayal, truth. You don't get to choose whether they arrive. You only get to choose what you do once you've opened the door and let them in. Frances knew that better than anyone. She knocked anyway, and because she did, Something that might have stayed buried is now in the light, and a little boy in Calgary is going to grow up knowing that someone, somewhere, made sure he had a chance. That was always going to be enough. Frances died on a Tuesday morning in February in a palliative care ward at Foothills Hospital with a folded piece of paper in her coat pocket that had my name and number on it. That's what I keep coming back to. Not the fraud, not the trial, not even the photograph of Owen in the yard with his stick sword. Just that piece of paper. The deliberate act of writing down the name of the woman your daughter is betraying because you have decided that truth matters more than loyalty to a lie. I used to think courage was loud. I used to think it looked like confrontation, like standing your ground, like not backing down. Frances taught me it can look like a thin coat in January and a cab fare you probably couldn't afford, and knocking on a stranger's door because the alternative is dying without having done the right thing. That kind of quiet, unglamorous decency. I don't have a better word for it than integrity. And I don't think integrity gets talked about enough as something you have to actively choose, sometimes at enormous personal cost. What my husband did was the opposite of that, and I've thought a lot in the time since about why. He wasn't stupid. He was genuinely good with numbers. I didn't imagine that. But intelligence without honesty is just a more efficient tool for doing damage. He used what he understood about our financial systems to build something hidden inside something I had worked my whole adult life to create. He was smart enough to make it look like nothing for almost 2 years. What he wasn't, what he never developed, somewhere along the way, was the willingness to be accountable, to look at what he was doing and reckon with it. That capacity, the one that makes you stop and say this is wrong and I need to stop, is not the same thing as being clever. It's something else entirely, and I think it's more important. Building the company back after was the hardest thing I've done, not because the finances were unrecoverable, they were damaged but not destroyed, but because I had to do it while also rebuilding my own trust in my own judgment. That took longer. There were weeks where I second-guessed every decision, every hire, every contract. Sylvie and Priya kept me anchored. My sister kept me honest. And eventually, something shifted. The doubt got quieter. What replaced it wasn't certainty exactly. I'm not sure certainty is a thing you can actually earn, but something more like steadiness. The knowledge that I had been tested at the worst possible time and I had not collapsed. I had kept going. And keeping going, it turns out, is most of what resilience actually is. It's not heroic. It's just the next morning and then the next one. Owen is 5 now, probably. I don't know what his life looks like. I know that every quarter a letter goes out from a foundation, and Blythe cashes whatever support it provides and probably doesn't think too hard about where it comes from. I hope that when he's old enough to understand what happened, the fact of that quiet help will mean something to him, not as a lesson about forgiveness. I'm not sure I've forgiven anything, exactly, but as proof that adults can choose to be better than the situation asks them to be. Frances knew that. She proved it, and I am still, more than anything else, just trying to be worthy of the truth she handed me on my porch that morning in the cold.